Ladies and gentlemen, everyone can take their seats and keep the discussion to a low rumble. Many of you know me. I'm Bill Rentiers. I'm the Lexington County Republican Party Chairman, and we're all here today to welcome and listen to a few remarks from Senator Tim Scott. Senator, welcome and glad to have you here.
Thank you very much. Well, thank y'all very much for taking the time to come out. I'll say that I've had an opportunity to visit several times since I became a U.S. Senator, and I am very blessed to serve in South Carolina. I believe that the secret sauce that our country is looking for oftentimes can be found right here at home. The fact of the matter is, from an economic standpoint, you look around our country and we're looking for ways to get this very slow-growing economy back up roaring. We can look no other place than South Carolina. And frankly, when you look at the upstate expansion of Michelin of $600 million, how are you, Mac? You all right, sir? When Mac stands up, I sit down. So you apologize, Mac. You continue, sir. I had the privilege of serving with Mac in the House. And, you look at BMW's $900 million expansion. You see jobs on the coast. You see the tire expansion in South Carolina throughout our state. We have 3 of the major tire companies now located in South Carolina. We are the second largest producing state in the union for tires. The jobs market is exploding here at home because we figured out the secret sauce. The right to work laws, very, very important. Opposing the NLRB, everything that doesn't make sense in the federal government. Having a low tax environment, we can thank our senators and House members for that. Frankly, South Carolina's tax rates are lower than the average around the nation. I believe that ultimately we're still working hard on our schools. I'm a guy who believes that things like Common Core is a problem in our nation. This notion of putting Arne Duncan in charge of education here in South Carolina makes me pull my hair out. It's all gone. It's a real challenge. So ultimately, one of the things we have to recognize and work towards is empowering our local school districts, not simply our state education head, but our local school districts, our parents. The more choices we give them, the better the chance our kids will succeed. And so we have to not nationalize, but localize our decisions in education. Most of you guys may have heard my story before. As a kid who flunked out of high school as a freshman, I understand the importance of strong-willed teachers, and a mama who believes that love comes at the end of a switch. I say a switch is a southern form of a southern apparatus of encouragement. She loved me a lot. And so those combinations will make our state the most fantastic place to live because we are already one of the best places on the earth to live. I have traveled the country for the last couple of weeks, seen several different places, have traveled the state. I'm on 42, this is probably my 4th or 5th time back to Lexington, but this is, I've gone to 42 of the counties in the state. I'll finish all 46 counties in the next 10 days or so, because my theory is when you represent people, you go where they are. You don't say come wherever I am. I go to where you are. And so that's the way that we represent, that's the way that we serve, and that's the way we'll continue to serve. I figure that y'all have seen and heard and enough about me so that I can stop a long conversation and start answering questions. That way we spend the bulk of our time answering questions, and the questions I do not know the answer to. That's why we elected Senator Shields. She's got the answers, Shane has the answers, Mac has the answers. I also brought a couple of my staff members. Greg in the back in the white shirt who takes all the information you want to give to us is my communications guy. And then Chuck, the guy with the big red tie on there, is my legislative director. So they're here with us too. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to start answering questions right about now.
I have a concern about the immigration bill, specifically with regard to the so-called Gang of Eight proposal.
Yes, sir.
Which now is passed the Senate. And what bothers me is that in itself is a 1,200-page bill. And then in order to fix all the purported problems with the border security, we got the amendment put in another 850 pages. This says it's going to do a lot of things. $4.5 billion for border security, going to build another 350 miles of fence, although it still leaves 1,236 miles unfunded. And it's going to ensure that we have E-Verify, going to have all these extra border security guards. And everything sounds, boy, that's really going to solve the problems if you get right down to the end of it. And whoever happens to be the Homeland Security chief, she can take any one or all of those things and decide that it's unwarranted, and they're not done. So what I'm concerned about, this thing is going to get passed, and everybody's going to say we got the border secured, and in fact you really haven't. How do you view, we can get into that correctly, House reconciliation with what?
Yes, sir. And when y'all ask your questions, if you'll just give me your name, that way I'll say, hey dude, let me explain it to you.
I'm Don Carlson.
Mr. Carlson, I'm taking my jacket off because I always say you should dress like your crowd. My crowd, only 4 or 5 of you guys were unfortunate like the rest of the crowd and had to wear, thank you, had to wear jackets. So if y'all don't mind, I'm taking my jacket off as we get hot in this room here. All right. A couple of questions of this crowd. I would say that you get probably the most important point in the legislation. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand and show me how many of y'all support the immigration legislation that's passed through the Senate. I will just tell you, if you don't already know my position on this bill, I'll articulate my positions, and you'll figure out pretty quickly when having a conversation with me, it's hard to misunderstand what I say. You may not like what I say, but it's hard to misunderstand what I say. So I am not a supporter of the immigration bill that passed through the Senate. I voted against that bill. I'm glad y'all clapped that time. Hey, when the first question gets you way off kilter. There are several really important reasons that Mr. Carson just articulated on why I do not support the legislation. I am not under the delusion that we're not going to have some type of immigration reform. I just want to first recognize that we should first and foremost be a land of laws. Yes. We are indeed a land of immigrants as well, but we are first a land of laws. Yes. And so the notion of immigration reform should start at the bedrock that we are guided and directed by the laws of the land, which to me means that having 1,200 pages substituted for the 900 pages 72 hours before the vote doesn't seem to speak to the intelligence of those of us who have to vote for it or against it. Now, I like reading. I am not at the place where I can read 1,200 pages in 72 hours and understand every facet of it. Now, I wouldn't support the first 844 pages. But the sleight of hand at the end was a difficult one for me to digest, number one. Two, when you read through what I believe is the preamble, the ability to get into a real immigration discussion, you find that the language speaks a lot about border security as you've just articulated. But that which specifically hinges upon the language is very little. Most things in the legislation hinges upon the ability of that Homeland Security person to say yay or nay, and then legal status starts to change before you get into the meat of the bill. In addition to the fact that I think it was about a third to 40% of the folks who currently are here can change status without actually going through the entire piece of legislation. And so there are triggers that allows things to occur before you actually see the full implementation of the bill, which I think is problematic. What we should have done, what we could have done, is we should have started the conversation by earning the respect of the public by having a single bill that focused on border security before we had any other conversation. Because if we did that, or if we do that from the House perspective, I think we walked away with the ability to say to the American people, not only did we listen to you, but we understood what you were saying and we responded to it by not simply saying our borders are secure, but by making sure that our borders were secure before we had the second iteration or second part of the conversation. That does not happen. We should not have a second part of the conversation. And that's where I stand. I understand that there's lots of 20,000 new border security agents. There's billions of dollars spent on border security. The fact of the matter is, while that it says that, it isn't the trigger. It isn't a prerequisite. It is not a prerequisite, which is problematic. A couple things that we could have done, that we should have done at the beginning, was to have a separate conversation about the laws that already exist. That's a novel concept. We got to work our way through what we already have. We have tons and tons of laws dealing with immigration. One of the challenges I think we face is that we have a workforce need that we should solve. But we don't need to change so much of the laws, especially the border security part, to get the workforce we need. We need, on average, 2 years ago, about 115 to 120,000. Sir, yes sir, thank you for coming. Thank you. I tell you what, this is a august body here now, all these guys in there. And our brokers are in the room, man. I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about the dogs in the house. You know, what we needed to have was a conversation about how many engineers, scientists, the STEM category, science, technology, engineering, math, how many of those folks do we need? Let's say we need about 120,000, we're producing about 80 to 90,000, so we have a 30,000 shortfall. We're educating the world's best and brightest people at our engineering schools. We should keep the ones that we want, give them a beast, and let them stick around as long as we need them. We can do that now without having to have 1,244 pages of an immigration bill. Personally, our farmers, in the agricultural needs of our state, we have a strong need for us to recognize the necessity of people who will actually work. If you can't find them here, you should be able to get the workforce you need. You should put your resources on the line, use E-Verify, take on all the liability, and find the workforce you need. I think we can address that without 1,244 pages. Or 1,200 pages, whatever the 44, it used to be 844 pages, 1,200 plus pages. I think we can accomplish those goals without the so-called immigration reform. My hope, sir, is that the House will do something very different. And instead of taking it holistically, they'll take a piecemeal approach and then stick with the Hastert rule. The Hastert rule says that before anything passes out of the House, the Republicans have to support it, and not simply the majority of the 435, but the majority of the 232 or 233 members of the House would have to support that legislation that comes out of the House. And I think if we did that, we'd be in a better position. And the fear of the House passing something is it creates a vehicle that goes to what we call conference, which is a couple of guys in the House, a couple of gals in the Senate. You get them together, they figure it out, and they send it back. And the fear is something like that brings about a very diluted approach to immigration reform. I will tell you that I believe that our crazy friends in the House and a couple of the crazy ones in the Senate will not stand for that to happen. And so ultimately, I think you'd find mutiny on the ship if that were to occur. So I have confidence that our Jeff Duncans and Joe Wilsons and Mark Sanfords, Trey, the crazy man Gowdy, and others will stand strong, stand tall, and then Mick Mulvaney will tie them all into a little knot. Y'all know Mick, he can do that, by the way. And make sure that the immigration package that we get out of the House is something that we can respect and stand strong for. If that doesn't happen, you'll find that we will be as vigorous in opposition as we were previously. Because ultimately, for us to be a land of immigrants, where everybody has an opportunity to succeed, we have to first be a land of laws. Sir.
Okay. I want to know, what are we going to do about Yawkey Mountain, being the state of South Carolina and the state of Washington and Canada? They won that little federal, as they call it, little federal fight. Are we going to open up Yawkey Mountain, or are we going to refund all the money from the states and give it back? to what they spent?
That's a good question. So Yucca Mountain has been in the news most recently. The courts have ruled that the Obama administration should do something that they aren't very comfortable doing. New concept.
Be more precise.
Harry Reid as well. It's obey the laws of the land. New concept. I understand. New concept. But what the court ruled was that you got to move forward with the process of identifying and making your necessary steps in the direction of opening up the mountain. Harry Reid has been screaming like a stuck pig. The truth of the matter is he's been supported by the administration. Plenty of roadblocks. And so ultimately, we as a state have invested over $1 billion in Yucca Mountain. And they're not going to give us money back.
I thought I'd ask.
What's your name again?
Art, Gary, I'm sorry.
Gary, I'm glad you asked, and unfortunately, I got to tell you the truth. South Carolina is not going to see that money back, so we should move forward. There's a reason why we spend so much time, so much money investing it in Yucca. It should be a place where we put this nuclear waste. And if we do what we're supposed to do as a nation, it will be. And so we ought to stand fast and stand strong on behalf of the citizens of South Carolina that have made the investment. But just as important, we have a nation who's made an investment as well. Many states have made investments, so we should see Yucca become that repository in the years to come. So
Think we'll fund it?
I think we'll continue to work in that direction, and I won't make a promise that I know I can't follow through on, because I simply don't have the power as just one vote to do so. But you'll find that I will be consistent in support of us doing so. Without question. Yes, ma'am. We'll come right back to y'all.
You might want to go to her first, because you're probably going to get mad at me when I ask you this.
I'll come back to you. The last question right here. Yes, sir.
Like mine's gonna be in a year.
All right, yes, sir.
My name is David Davis.
Yes, David.
I'm gonna give it a swirl. I'm scared to death.
I'm scared of the question already, but
In April of 2009, Department of Homeland Security named me a potential terrorist for honorably serving in the U.S. military. I joined a group named by DHS as a potential terror group because their unwavering support of the U.S. Constitution, that group being the American Legion. I've said, and people thought I was crazy, I believe the government's here to fulfill all my needs, especially in a time of crisis, and I say it outside in case of drones flying over. It sounds crazy, but we have a CIA director that's not sure of the constitutionality of using U.S. drones on U.S. civilians on U.S. soil. I asked Verizon if there's any protection against illegal spying on my phone, and I'm told to go to their legal department. Where is this insanity going to end? This is the kind of thing, and I hate to say it, that happened with the rise of the Nazi Party. And we're discussing this today in the United States of America, and I am scared to death.
yeah, thank you, Mr. Gary. I will tell you that there are a couple things. Number one, when we had the opportunity to stand with Rand, remember those several months ago, I was one of the guys that went to the floor to speak on behalf of Rand Paul because he was 100% correct on we should understand, can you kill an American, drone or otherwise, frankly, on American soil? And the answer finally came back because of Rand Paul, no. But until that point, Eric Holder and others that we saw for a long time kept saying, well, it probably won't happen. I don't see the word probably anywhere.
Well, they probably won't keep our data from our
Yeah,
phone and
they
email.
probably will, but I mean, at the end of the day, here's what I would tell you that you're going to be like the fourth question I get to, so.
Okay.
Even though you're anxious back there, I'm going to get to you, it's going to take a long time, unfortunately. I will tell you that the fact of the matter is that as we look into the future, the one thing, Mr. Carson, I think ma'am? Carlson. You have an L in your name. All right, I just took it out. We renamed you Mr. Carlson, man. We're back. One of the things that Mr. Carlson and I were having a conversation about here was about the rule of law. Let us realize that the thing that is under attack more than anything else is the rule of law. it gives me greater concern than bad policy. Because if someone can indiscriminately enforce the laws that they like, we can't be the United States of America. We cannot consistently be the country that stands in the face of all enemies, foreign and domestic, if we will not enforce all the laws of our land. And if we don't like the laws of our land, we should change those laws. But the reason why our founding fathers created this whole balance of powers concept is because they work. And what we've seen so far for the last several years, and we've seen it become in vogue since the last election, is this acceleration of picking and choosing which laws we like in the criminal court on drug offenses, to the whole conversation around the immigration, to whether we enforce or don't enforce DOMA, and on it goes. We're on the slippery slope. So your concerns, I think, are merited. And it takes those of us who are in positions as we are, whether on the state level, on the federal level, to have a backbone to say no. And so you find that there are meetings going on right now. I've had a couple of them myself in the last 10 days of trying to figure out who has standing to go in, I won't say after because we're being recorded, so it sounds like I'm too aggressive. to go and search for a remedy for this law-breaking environment that seems to be now in vogue in Washington, D.C. by the lawmakers themselves. So take very seriously your comments, because I do. And ultimately, if we're going to have something change, it's going to be because we, the people, not the government, takes a very strong stand. And I think we have to. Sir.
I will be brief. A couple of days ago, Newt Gingrich, some of the TV stuff and blogs and whatnot, he made the statement to the effect that Republicans really don't have an answer once they repeal Obamacare. It's very, very great for conservatives to say, we want you to repeal Obamacare. Yes, we're going to do it. Okay, and once you've done it, now,
Okay.
free market.
Let me say a couple things on that topic. Number one, I'd rather spend the next hour talking about the inconsistencies in the 3,000 pages that make up Obamacare, or at least devote some time to the 30,000 pages of unwritten regulations that go into effect on October 1st in Obamacare, or the whole fact that the monstrosity went from $900 billion in 2009 estimated price tag to 1.8 trillion in 2011 estimated price tag to now looking towards a $3 trillion, according to some experts, estimated price tag. I'd like to talk about the breaking of the relationship between the patient and the doctor because of the Independent Payment Advisory Board. This 15-member autonomous board, 6-figure salaries, with no one above them, no one below them, and no one to control them. And this is the cost containment feature that will decide how to ration care into our future. I'd rather have a conversation about the size, the complexity, and the expense of Obamacare, but you've not provided me that opportunity. So I won't talk about that. I will instead talk about what are common sense solutions that you can find in the private sector that would reduce the cost of health insurance and make it far more affordable. Because you have not provided me an opportunity to talk about the fact that a $95 individual penalty is not an enticement to buy a $2,000 insurance policy. You've not provided me the opportunity to talk about the fact that the 40-hour work week is going away because of Obamacare. You won't let me talk about that. I won't talk about solutions. That's all you've allowed me to answer in your question there. There are 4 things that I think we could do overnight to reduce the cost of health insurance. Realize that we are only having a conversation about the price of health insurance premiums and not a conversation about reducing the cost of health care. Everyone knows if you only talk about the price, you may not get to the actual cost. The underlying cost of health insurance is not driven by premiums. It's driven by health. if you have morbidities that you're not taking care of, you're only going to increase the cost of your health insurance later down the road. We suffer one major malady in America today: the inability to add and subtract or multiply. We also know it as math. That's a big problem. Here are 4 things that we can do almost immediately to reduce the cost of health insurance, make it more accessible, and move on to a different conversation. First thing we could do is allow for competition across state lines. According to most experts, it would cause a 20% reduction in premium. Said differently, competition typically lowers the price. Would you concur, sir? Sir? And raises quality. Second thing that we could do very quickly is allow for small business owners to pool their employees with other small business owners so that we have a larger pool of employees, because larger pool of employees in the same field reduces the likelihood of adverse risk selection and increases the likelihood of having a pool that reduces the price of health insurance. Said differently, association plans provides us an opportunity to see another reduction of about 20% of the cost of health insurance premiums. I don't want to pretend that we're talking about care, but just premiums. So those 2 steps can lower the cost of health insurance between 35 if I'm wrong and 45 if I'm optimistically right. Third thing we could do, besides cost, providing competition across state lines, which of course is really smart, I think. Association plans, I was a small business owner for the last 15 years. I signed the front of the paycheck. Novel concept in the United States government. Someone who signed the front of the paycheck and not just the back. So getting my 7 employees with other insurance agencies' employees would really reduce the cost of health insurance. The third thing that we do is we address the pre-existing conditions. Pre-existing conditions are something that is, in fact, a challenge to a lot of people. Not a massive percentage like 30, 40, 50% of Americans, but a strong enough percentage that we should do something about it to the extent that we possibly can. Now, we had in the first piece of legislation that I supported, besides a tax reform bill, was Obamacare, how to repeal it and replace it. And we included $6 billion of funding healthcare pools to help those folks with pre-existing conditions find coverage in the private sector market. Because we believe that having some ability to reduce the cost of insurance for those who have pre-existing conditions that cannot find coverage would be a smart decision. And the final piece of the puzzle, which I find quite important, harder to do, so I leave it for the last, is the notion of medical tort reform. I know there are a couple of attorneys in the room. Would you please raise your hand so I can see where you are? I wish I had my back against the wall before I say what I'm going to say next, okay? So, medical tort reform is very, very important because most doctors say that 27% of the cost of providing medical services is because they are performing what they consider and call defensive medicine. Defensive medicine cost all of us, let's say 25 cents on the dollar. Because there are so many lawsuits, and no offense to the lawyers in the room, there's so many lawsuits that our doctors are trying to protect their cost of their liability, which then requires them to do more services or tests that may not be necessary, but in a courtroom, you can't have done enough. So they're trying to protect themselves. They say that would save us about 27%. Now, Texas is a great role model for this, and some other things. What I learned from my friend Governor Perry in Texas is that when they finally finished their medical tort reform, they saw droves of doctors coming back to the state. They saw the cost of health insurance steadying or slightly going down a little bit in some areas. And they saw more jobs being created because they found themselves in an atmosphere that was conducive for growth. So those are 4 examples, just 4 examples. Now, I won't say Republicans, I won't say conservatives, I'll say Tim Scott would support those things because there's this big controversy on what we should or should not do. I would do all 4 of those things. And I think we would reduce the cost of health insurance because what we are doing, you just said, is that when you lower competition, you reduce quality. What we see in the Unaffordable Care Act, some people call it Affordable Care Act, I call it the Unaffordable Care Act, is a couple of things. And this is the part that really should frustrate those folks on the entry level of the job market. Number one, Obamacare does not make health insurance free. There's an article in the paper today that says that if you look to the exchanges to see a reduction in the price of health insurance, look someplace else. Number one, it doesn't make health insurance free. And number two, it doesn't make health insurance more affordable. It may shift who pays for your health insurance, but it doesn't make your health insurance more affordable. And number three, before there was an Obamacare, 15% of Americans did not have health insurance. Said differently, 45 million folks did not have health insurance. Should they have access to health care if possible? My answer is yes. And if you want access to health care, you don't want the government running it. The federal government doesn't make this better. We're pretty good with the military, but we got a limited Article 1, Section 8 for a reason. However, and this is the sad part, at the end of spending nearly $3 trillion, we will still have, estimates say, 10% or 30 million Americans without health insurance. So I'll ask you the question I ask myself every day that I have this conversation about health insurance. Should we spend $3 trillion to provide 5% of Americans' population with more health insurance? I think the answer is no. We can do it better in the private sector. None of us are in opposition to someone having access to health care. I am in opposition to having the federal government figure it out.
Yes.
We don't have common sense. I'm looking for it still. I have to drink my common sense before I go across the Potomac. Make sure I still have it. And I drink it when I leave. When I come home, so I'll still make sense. That's the funniest joke I have. If you didn't laugh at that one,
I'm Mary Carr.
Hey, Mrs.
And
Carr.
Senator, glad to have you in Lexington.
Thank you, ma'am.
I think one of the biggest things that we are really encountering, and you have mentioned that we are a nation of laws and should be, but the laws that you guys make are being trumped.
I voted against most of those, so I was looking for who you were talking about. Go ahead, yes, ma'am.
Are being trumped
Yes, ma'am.
by fiat.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm under the impression that the people that are in the House and Senate are supposed to help stop this. Is that true, or are we just gonna keep letting this going on?
The answer to your question is difficult, because the answer is it should be versus it is. I have a commitment to myself to be as transparent and as honest as possible, not to give you the answer you want. If I'm lucky enough to give you the answer you want, I want to make it as funny as possible, because the rest of my answers aren't going to be very funny, and this is one of the ones that's not very funny. We should be in a position to be incredibly helpful to stop things from happening, and we can. The challenge we face as a nation is that we gave the President of the United States 2 years of the trifecta. We control the House, the Senate, and the White House. And in those 2 years, they did, in my opinion, a lot of damage to the psyche of our country. And perhaps some things that are irreversible. And that's where your comments are coming from my perspective. Your concern may be the laws that we're passing, or maybe the laws that we should be repealing. I think a good year in Congress is when we repeal laws, not when we pass laws. I think when we repeal laws. There are some laws I would support, like a couple that I have. But most often, a good year for Congress is when we're spending as much time investigating the laws that should be repealed, the regulations that are causing businesses to fail. We're shipping jobs to China not because of something that the White House thinks is happening. It's because they keep passing these laws that create a regulatory nightmare, so companies can go somewhere else. It's just a law of unintended consequence. So yes, we should be in a position to stop bad things from happening. And I think when the House was won back in 2010, and I was part of that freshman class, we stopped bad things from happening. But so many bad things had already happened in 9 and 2010 that we're trying to reverse. Obamacare is, we're trying to reverse something that happened during those 2 years. And we're spending a ton of time because it takes over 1/6 of our economy. It costs us trillions of dollars. It's going to break that lake, but we're spending all the time trying to figure out how to repeal IPAP, how to repeal the 1099 thing that we did a couple years ago, how to repeal the medical device tax, how to repeal the entire thing as a whole, how do we repeal this part, that part. So a lot of our energies on our side of the aisle is focused on how to get rid of what has already been done, and we need either 2/3 in both houses to override the president, or we should see 2016 as a part of the solution. Because you can't do it with this president in office unless you have 2/3 of both bodies. But what you can do, and what we have done, I think it's seen done fairly successfully, although we continue to argue with ourselves sometimes, is that the House is serving as an impediment to more bad stuff happening. Dodd-Frank is another one of those things that happened in the first 2 years. And here's the biggest problem that we oftentimes miss from my perspective. And I don't think we understood this during the 2012 election. I hope we did. I don't think we did. The President of the United States is the CEO of the largest business in all of the world. $4 trillion budget. He has the ability to let his agency heads reinterpret regulations that creates a legislative-like environment. So that no longer is Congress or the Senate making the rules. The rules are now the definition in regulations, which is a very dangerous place for us to be. Whether you like Bill Clinton or not, and I did not. Whether you like George Bush or not, some here did not, but I did like George Bush. We have had consistently for the last 50 years, most presidents want to work with Congress to get things done or work against Congress, the great deals, the bifurcation, the Welfare Reform Act, with President Clinton and the Democrat and Republican controlled Congress. These things were working through law to change the way that we behave. Currently, our president doesn't go through that process. The EPA picks and chooses what they want to do. By reinterpreting what it is that they can do. That's why Mr. Carlson started the conversation about the Homeland Security having the ability and having been empowered to decide who's doing what, and that changes your legal status. That's the danger of having someone in the White House who doesn't respect the balance of powers. And so we spend a lot of our time trying to reverse the curse that happened in the first 2 years under the president as it relates to the legislative environment, but we still have not picked up the secret sauce that eliminates the regulatory environment that's been created. We've gone from 71,000 pages to over 171,000 pages of regulations before we hit the Obamacare regulatory environment. Go on top of that, 171,000 pages. That is all bureaucrats creating, in my opinion, something akin to legislation, which is far more powerful because they're going to outlive me. I believe in term limits. I'm going to go home at some point because there's somebody smarter and brighter than, not right now, but someone smarter and do this job really well. Are you clapping because I'm leaving or are you clapping because I'm fun? We're going to talk about that a little bit. So I mean, at some point we got to get out the way and let other people come do these jobs, right? But that means that the bureaucrats will be empowered for decades because they're not going anywhere unless we start putting pressure on the chief executive. Now, I think for us to do that, we're going to have to, in 2016, work with a single-minded focus, besides getting all of us elected, single-minded focus on changing America's landscape by changing whoever the next president's going to be in January 2017, because that person will control the bureaucratic environment that's in Washington, D.C. He says, I'm going to be patient this time.
Yeah, my name's Eddie McCain,
Eddie.
and a few minutes ago you mentioned Rand Paul, and it kind of sparked a twofold question. What do you believe the constitutional role of the federal government is when providing foreign aid? And what was the reasoning behind voting against Rand Paul's amendment to put a freeze on the $1.5 billion of aid going to Egypt?
I'll answer the second half first, and then I'll ask you to repeat the first one.
Okay.
So, why did I not support Rand Paul's position on cutting off aid to Egypt 2 weeks ago? A couple reasons. First one is, while it appears to be a coup, smells like, looks like, walks like a coup, we have not identified it as a coup yet, though that legislation would have done that. So, I'm in the position that my strongest Middle East perspective has to do with the state of Israel. All that's happening throughout the Middle East is sometimes painful to watch. It evokes an emotional response, but I don't always consider everything that happens around the world in our national interest. There are atrocities that happen every day in other countries that aren't in our national interest. We're not called to be the world's police. I don't think we are. I've got two brothers who serve in the military. I thank God for our military veterans. If you have a Navy hat on, perhaps you serve in the Navy yourself. I thank God for men and women who put their lives on the line on behalf of freedom and liberty. I love these guys and gals. You'll find that true in all my public service. So I don't believe that our military should be the world's police. I do think we should have strategic alliances that keep our nation safe, free. I believe that Israel is a part of that footprint. I think from a biblical perspective, I'm a Psalm 122 guy, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. So much of how I see the world comes from a prism of biblical foundation. And so for me, as I look through the challenges of Egypt, I see it through a prism of Israel. And I thought in the best interest of Israel, that border that's important has been consistently the healthy relationship since the Camp David Accord was 87 when we created the relationship with Egypt. It's been a very important part of that dialogue. So I've supported the military of Egypt because I believe that they still have had a consistent relationship with our ally Israel. I will tell you that in the last 2 weeks, my opinion has started to change. I didn't vote for the F-16s going to the military, the Egyptian military, about 2 months ago. Another amendment. I thought giving that kind of firepower to a place that's fairly volatile was a bit much. Could they buy that with the $1.3 billion that they get? I'm sure they could, but we've got that kind of weaponry at our disposal, and we pretty much dictate who gets it. So I thought that was too much. And I saw most recently the president has finally come around and concurred that he's going to withhold those weapons going to his Egyptian military. I think this is a good thing. So I did not support it at the time because I did not think it was in the best interest of our allies in the region and for the direction that I was hopeful that was going to happen. I will tell you that 900 deaths later, I'm evaluating my own position because I'm having trouble with that position. I think as information accumulates, you should be willing to take everything into consideration. So that's where I have been, and I can tell you that I am shifting a bit now. I'm watching that situation very carefully. Because I think one of the things I've learned through reading history a little bit, especially weapons more than money, money too, but weapons more than money. The weapons we give so often come back to haunt us. So I'm very careful on how we do that, number one. Number two, the resources that we give constitutionally, I don't know that you would find the constitutional underpinnings of foreign aid unless you find it if you see it as a part of what it takes to keep America safe, which I think it has been helpful. I think we have, it to a large part has become more and more dysfunctional. The value of the American dollar and its leverage on foreign nations, as the Egyptian military has said yesterday, I think it was, we're going to evaluate our position with our Western friends, so to speak. They're going to evaluate that, which tells me that the resources that we're providing in their evaluation may not be as important as it once was, which means, in my opinion, that we ought to evaluate our resources as well. Now, I've said very consistently, we should be evaluating all of our foreign aid. We give $2 billion to Pakistan. We've had great consultation with Pakistan. We should evaluate every facet of our foreign aid funding. Now, it's about $40 billion, is that right? About $40 billion. Now, $40 billion in a $4 trillion budget is not a lot. But the question is, are we funding our adversaries? And I think we should understand the answer to that question. And we should evaluate that from my perspective on what we do into the future. That's where I am on the issue.
The other part, you asked me to ask
Yeah,
you.
I answered I reassured you for the first time ever, a compound question. And so my answer to the first part, which was, where do we find the constitutional underpinning? I'll tell you, I don't see it. You may see it in the ability to think through our national protection and what it takes to keep America safe as a part of our focus and our objectives and our strategic position on helping to provide resources to those folks that we think are strategically placed around the world. But we should evaluate that, but the federal, the constitutional underpinning of it, I think could be questioned without any question. I don't see it there. I don't think you do either, or you would have asked that question.
Correct. You're correct.
Yes, sir. All right.
Thank you for answering my question.
Yes, sir. I'm not always like that. I'm not always gonna give you the answer you may want. Hopefully it's enough, Mr. Mayor. Good to see the mayor here. Mayor Lexington. Welcome to Lexington. Thank you, sir. You may not always like the answers, but I'm gonna give you the truth that as I know it, and if I'm wrong, I'm all right saying I was wrong. Yeah, that's the way it should be.
Senator,
I was wrong.
this kind of dovetails off Mr. McCain's question here. This is not so much a question, but a statement. This morning, there are nuns being paraded through the streets of Cairo by the Muslim Brotherhood supported people that were removed from Morsi crowd, that were removed. The Coptic sect of Christians in Egypt is one of the oldest. They were put there by the Apostle Mark.
Yes.
2,000 years ago, and they are being persecuted along with the Christians in Lebanon and Syria because of their connection to the present regimes, which they live comfortably under for many, many decades, in some cases hundreds of years. And this turmoil, just be aware that we got more than just the Jewish folks there, we also got Christians that are, one of the oddities was seeing the Christians in Syria align themselves with Hezbollah, the Shia group, to protect themselves against the people we're trying to send money to, that Lindsey Graham wants to send weapons to. The Al-Qaeda has infiltrated. I think the Syrian crowd, the Syrian Free Army, was on the right track at first, but now they've been infiltrated by Al-Qaeda, and giving them weapons is not a good idea.
Well, two things. Thank you for your comment. Second, 5% of Egypt's population are Christians. And the atrocities that are happening to the church outside of America in countries throughout the world is something that we see so little attention being paid to, frankly. We struggle with the notion of religious freedom in America in a way that is civil, comparatively speaking, to the way that other countries deal with. China is a great example of the notion of religious freedom. And so your comments, solid as a rock. I'll do more research on the numbers that you talked about, but there's no question that there is an atrocity happening throughout the world. I'm going to go to someone who hasn't asked a question yet, because as I said earlier, my time is limited. I'm supposed to leave at 9:50 and it's 9:55. He's cutting me off. You get the last question. I understand that. But we have another 10:15 here in Columbia area where we have an opportunity to talk to other folks in different lights. So we're going to try to be as timely as possible and respectful of everyone's time as I possibly can.
This will be quick.
Take your time. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned a while
You got the
ago,
last question either way.
reverse the curse.
Yes, ma'am.
That should be your campaign slogan.
Thank you, ma'am.
That's right.
But, you know, I gotta tell you, being raised in a single-parent household by a strong mom and a praying grandmother, I think was Romans 8:28 coming to life. And we know all these things work together for those who love God and call according to His purpose.
And 29.
29.
29 means because God is committed to conforming us to the image of His Son.
Absolutely, which connects very well with Romans 12:2. We'll go back to Romans 8:31, which is if God be for us, who can then be against us? I would say this in the end, however. Hallelujah! I believe that God's ultimate plan has been to teach me how to reverse the curse in my life. Because I saw everybody besides me as a problem. And then I realized the problem was in the mirror. You ever had that time when you wake up and realize that you're the problem? And so what I try to do, ma'am, is to understand the underpinnings of these generational challenges that we face from poverty, the way we think, the way we treat other people, this culture. And finally this, because this is really where reverse the curse becomes very important. I believe, and perhaps y'all may disagree, I believe that the greatest challenge this country faces is whether or not we allow for a moral conversation to be a part of the national conscience.
Absolutely.
And we're going to have to figure that path forward. And we're going to have to stop ceding ground without a fight. We need to make sure that the national, there's a guy named Andy Stanley, who's
Charles Stanley's son.
yes, ma'am. He's got a series I'd encourage everybody to watch. It's called God and Country. God and Country. It is a fabulous series. I'm studying it right now as a part of my preparation for this next season of my life, as we fight this notion that the national conscience should be void of faith. What a ridiculous comment for a nation founded on Judeo-Christian foundations.
Yes.
So be careful. We're coming to that next.
Great.
Coming to the big board. Last question, and they'll kick me out. My staff alone will kick me out.
Okay, my name is Wilma Story.
I remember your story. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That's why I left you for last. I'm afraid of the question already. Continue. Yes, ma'am.
All right, I just want to know,
Yes, ma'am.
all right, when you were a House member,
Yes, ma'am.
you were a co-sponsor of the fair tax.
Yes, ma'am.
Now that you're a senator.
Yes, ma'am.
Will you or are you or not going to be a fair tax
Supporter?
supporter?
Yes, ma'am. The comments are on the fair tax.
Fair. Hey, don't, okay. I know.
Yeah. When you're right, you don't change your position.
That's right, well then
So
let's
I'm not
get
going to change my
going.
position. I'll tell you, however, that the fair tax on a federal level has a long road to hoe. So I am still very supportive of it.
Absolutely.
And I'll consistently be there because we're going to overcome the marketing challenge of telling people that we're raising their taxes in order to lower their taxes, because the ability to digest it will stop when they say that we're going to raise the taxes. So while I think of it as a logical approach, as long as on the fair tax we're able to eliminate the 16th Amendment.
Yes.
Because you don't do that, you don't. Long story short, I still am where I was then, and I will continue to fight for lowering taxes in America, because the dumbest thing we can do is to have the highest tax rates in the world when the rest of the world's lowering their taxes.
Right, now just think of this, everyone. The other day, it was the 96th year that the women got the right to vote. We can get it's the same thing. Don't be afraid, because they think that it will never happen, because it might.
Hey, at the end of the day, truth is still truth, and if it takes 96 years, way too long for women. I say for the fair tax, we'll keep working very hard to bring it to life. But we have a lot of hot topics that are going to get light of day, and I'll make sure that I continue to promote fair tax. Let me just say to those folks who have taken the time to come out and hang out with me, except for Tony. Thank y'all for taking the time to hang out, and I appreciate being in a position to earn your respect and hopefully to earn your vote. At the end of the day, if you have need of us, we are a phone call away, an email away, a letter away. We periodically call folks every week who are constituents who write in or email in. Obviously, we get thousands of correspondence on a monthly basis, so we don't call everybody back. Though we do call everybody who says, Tim, give me a call back. A lot of people, correspondents, do not want a response, so we don't call back. Call me back, we don't want a response. But I do pick and choose so that I can have a chance to make sure that your answers that you're receiving from my office are consistent with your question, and that you're not getting a form letter back. If you write my letter, email my letter to my office, and you get a form letter back, I need to know about that. We do not do form letters. We try to be very clear on our positions, and if we're not, that's one of the reasons why I spot check my folks. I trust them, but my mama taught me to trust and verify.
That was Reagan that
I
taught
lied
you
here when I
that.
was young, and I apologize now to God. Thank y'all so much.
Hey, let's try to get your picture
Somewhere, I need a white hat. Let's take it.
Excellent.
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Well, I hope, but
Sounding good? Yeah, how about you?
Senator, you got guts. Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you for taking the time to share.
Yes, sir. Enjoy it. Thanks for your service.
Yeah, good to see you. Good
You
to
all
see
right?
you. Yeah, I talked to Spencer last week on your interview stuff.
Okay.
That's good news. Work in progress.